I just want to mention that the underwriter for today's episode is Anchor Podcast Platform. These are the free podcast people that will help you or anybody who wants to start a podcast. They'll get you going and they'll put you on all the platforms from Spotify to Apple and Google, Stitcher, and they do it for free. They don't charge you a dime. I mean, this is all about the democratization of audio so that everybody can have a voice online like this. And they've supported me in getting my podcast started. And for that, I'm grateful. This is Rumble. This is Michael Moore. Well, obviously, I'm Michael Moore. I'm not Rumble, but the podcast is called Rumble with Michael Moore. And we have with us here in our podcast studio, sitting atop a movie theater here somewhere in New York City, a filmmaker that I've admired for many, many years. And I'm really excited and happy to have him on the podcast today. My guest here in the podcast studio is none other than the great filmmaker John Sayles. Let's just jump right into this because you have made so many great films that were very important to me. But I'm going to start right at the beginning. I mean, for people that, you know, if you live out there in Topeka and all you have is the shopping mall cinema, they're not too conducive to showing the great films, even the ones this year. If you live in Topeka, I don't know if you've been able to see Parasite or Jojo Rabbit. Maybe you have. Maybe it's made its way there. But the truly indie films, the ones that are made without the heavy hand of the studio, you don't get to see them in large swaths of the country. But John, you were really a pioneer in the late 70s and 80s, and in the probably, I would say, 7 years leading up to me making my first film. And me, when I have no film school in me, I just liked the movies, and I went to a lot of them.
Pretty much the same with me.
Was that true for you? So
I didn't go to film school.
You didn't go to film school?
No.
Okay. So basically you and I start out knowing nothing, and in some ways knowing a whole hell of a lot because of who maybe we are or what we've lived through. Or
well, seeing, you know, as Quentin Tarantino would be happy to tell you, seeing a lot of movies is a kind of, if
film
you're paying
school.
attention, it's a film school.
Yeah.
And then there's the other part of it, which is if you didn't go to film school, you had all that time to be living and not hanging around with film school students and seeing what goes on in the world, which is worth something as well.
Right. So John, you have made Brother from Another Planet, Matewan, 8 Men Out, Return of the Secaucus Seven, Lone Star, Passion Fish. I think I would be in your top 1% in terms of, I could claim to maybe have seen all but one of your films.
Yeah, there's 18 now, so it's getting harder to have seen them all.
Yeah, I think I could name 16 to 17 of them right now.
That's pretty good.
And I know where I saw them.
Uh-huh.
You know, when a film has that kind of impact on you. Okay, so it's 1979, 1980. I'm living in Flint, Michigan. I founded an alternative newspaper, and I was doing that every month, every couple of weeks. It was kind of like this podcast. It was supposed to be a monthly paper, but then started doing it every other week. Sometimes I do it every week. The joke I'm making to the people who have been listening to the first 6 weeks of this podcast is that we announced that this was a weekly podcast, and I don't think we've done less than 4 a week.
There's a lot to talk about.
There's a lot going on. I'm sorry. My apologies to everybody who thought they were just subscribing to a free weekly podcast. It's so free, but we come to you when we need to. So anyways, I really wanted to have you on one of my early podcasts here because you are an early mentor of mine, even though you did not sign up for that job. I had like an old Chevy Impala that my parents let me use, and so I would drive to Ann Arbor to see the indie films, foreign films, documentaries, and it is there where I first saw, and I believe that you were present to introduce the film in Ann Arbor, Return of the Secaucus Seven. Now, I had no idea what that title meant. I'd never heard of the word Secaucus. I didn't know it was a city in New Jersey. Yeah. And I was so blown away by it. And this would be the first of now between I think it came out in 79, but
it actually came out in late 79. It didn't work in New York for a couple weeks, and they redid the poster and rethought the theaters it was going to play in, and then it came out in 80 again.
Yeah, okay, so then sometime in 80, that's when I saw it in Ann Arbor. So I started making Roger and Me, my first film, in 1987. Mm-hmm. So this would be about 7 years before, and it was one of these seminal films where when you leave the theater kind of exhilarated by a more authentic form of storytelling. And your film, of course, was not a documentary. Mm-hmm. This is a fiction film that had humor and drama and everything else involved. That it's one of the first times I got to thinking, geez, I wonder if I could do this.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting because I had those moments, and they were first. I saw John Cassavetes' movie.
Which one?
When I was in college, I think I saw the first one that I saw was Minnie and Moskowitz, but then I saw some of the other ones.
Faces,
and then I saw Melva Van Peebles' Sweet Sweetback's Badass Song,
right,
on Peachtree Street in Atlanta, where it ran for about a year.
Yeah.
I was down there doing day labor, and just one day I said, I'm not going to go work for $1 an hour. I'm going to go to the movies,
Right.
And it was a wonderful audience participation movie. And clearly, kind of guerrilla filmmaking, but I hadn't seen this movie before, and neither had the audience, which is why many of them were back for the third time.
Right.
They were seeing themselves on the screen.
And that's how I felt when I saw Return of the Secaucus Seven. I'd never seen a film like this. And it was so natural and wonderful. And I just and listen. I went to 3 or 4 films a week. I went to the ones in the cinemalls,
right?
And but then I get in the car and go down to Ann Arbor. They had like 7 film societies, or I go to the Detroit Film Theater at the Detroit Institute of Arts. That was also an hour away from where I was living. Occasionally other places. Sometimes we drive to Toronto actually to see a good film, or Chicago. We're about 250 miles from each city. So, but I just love the movies. And so your film and hearing you speak really kind of, the light bulb went off. And we should, before, I've kind of skipped what happened before Return of the Secaucus Seven with you. I mean, first of all, you've been nominated, I think, for at least 2 Oscars. Am I correct in that?
For best screenplay twice.
For screenplay, so I'm sure it was Passion Fish, and I'm guessing
Lone Star.
Lone Star. Oh,
yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
And but before that, you're a dude from Schenectady. Okay, so if people don't know where that is, it's up. Let's just say Schenectady. It's not Albany.
No, but go up the Hudson. Take a left at the Mohawk River, and there's Schenectady. And it's where General Electric used to be. So,
correct.
And right now it's kind of, in some ways, a mini Detroit, in which that the big industry left, and it's got a lot of empty buildings, and it's trying to readjust.
But it was an industrial town when you grew up, factory town, whatever. I think your parents were teachers, or your mom was a teacher and your dad was a principal, or something like that.
He eventually became a principal.
But he would start out. They both started out as teachers.
Yeah.
So essentially, even though your parents are educated in that sense, they are the lowest paid educated people. That makes them part of the working class.
Yeah.
So you grew up this way. You go off to college. Did you finish?
Yeah, I did. I was, I finished in 4 years, which was pretty good of me. And some of it was during the Vietnam War, and I had already worked in hospitals and factories, and it just looked like 4 years where I don't have to, war or no war, be in the military,
right? And
4 years where I don't have to go back and work in a factory or a hospital.
And that was a time where you could get a college exemption.
Yeah,
you didn't have to. Worry about the draft.
And so I was a psychology major. We used to joke that it was you were either pre-med or pre-patient. I was pre-patient. I wasn't that serious about it, but it was something that I could maintain a C- average in and stay in college. And there was not a drama major there. There wasn't any film courses there. One English teacher taught film, and he like one semester he just showed all of Bergman's movies, including the first 3 or 4, which aren't very good.
Wow.
Where he's figuring it out. You know, he was a theater director before that, and so. But I just as you did, I found movies. I would drive in, you know, from Western Massachusetts, where I was going to college, into Boston to see movies.
Right.
In Albany, there was a basement in the library where they showed kind of like interesting old movies. And then there was a very hip Jesuit at one of the religious Catholic teaching colleges with the crucifix on the wall and the projector in the room, who was showing like, you know, Bergman movies and experimental movies and stuff like. I'm sure he didn't stay a Jesuit. I mean, imagine he got married to some hip nun by the end of the 60s. But that's where you go to seek out movies that weren't mainstream movies.
Sure. So then, and then during this time, before, during, after college, after you also, you didn't go right into the workaday world in the sense of you're a college graduate, you can get a better job or whatever. Mm-hmm. It seems that what I remember you saying, or sometime when I met you years ago, that you did a whole bunch of things, from driving truck to just sort of.
No, I was never a truck driver. I mostly went back to working in hospitals and extended care facilities.
Same thing.
I was the Paul Bunyan of orderlies. I was really probably better at that than I'll ever be.
Enjoy doing that.
I didn't enjoy it, but I was good at it. I wasn't squeamish. I had a lot of patience, and I was strong enough to move the patients around and restrain them when that was necessary without hurting them.
Right.
I worked in a sausage factory, so I was in the meat packers union. That was a big deal because this is back when minimum wage was $1 an hour. And in the hospitals, I would get $1.10 if I would work the midnight shift, where people died. I figure if you have to deal with dead people, they pay you more.
But you're writing during this time too.
I'm writing during this time, and so right at the end of my meatpacking career, I got a short story accepted at Atlantic Monthly magazine, and they said, well, it's 70 pages long. This is way too long. Why don't you make it into more short stories or make it into a novel? And if you make it into a novel, you could use a plot. And I said, great. And so I was actually put on unemployment, and that was my first grant to the arts. And so for about 18 months, I could sit and just write. And I finished the novel and got it published. You know? And so I had a whole kind of early career as a novelist. Yeah, I got nominated for a National Book Award for my second novel and stuff like that.
And this is before your first film.
Before, yeah. And so I had this idea in the back of my head. I had acted a little bit in college and directed a little bit in college. I was in a theater company up in Massachusetts with David Strathairn and Gordon Clapp and a couple other people who've become, you know, well-known actors. Gina Davis, I think I directed her in one of her first jobs. And so there was in the back of my head of maybe making movies. I didn't know anybody in the movie industry, as I'm sure you didn't. You know,
nobody was going to open the door for us.
No. And so, you know, and there weren't a million books about making it, and there certainly wasn't a web to, you know, watch videos about how to make a movie. So it was kind of, well, how much does the equipment cost to rent? And where do you go do that? And, you know, so I educated myself as much as possible. And Secaucus Seven really came out of working in theater, and Jeffrey Nelson, who was the producer at the theater that we worked at, who was a guy I'd gone to college with, just said, we know so many good actors, and you're starting to write screenplays. You know, I'd gotten a screenplay job working for Roger Corman. Why don't we make a movie? And I had a whopping $30,000 in one place at one time, which I figured, when is this going to happen ever again?
Because of your work on the Roger Corman.
Yeah, I had written two or three movies for Roger. And
which ones did you write?
I wrote Piranha.
You wrote Piranha?
Yeah.
Wow.
The original Piranha.
The original Piranha.
Yeah, and I wrote a movie called The Lady in Red, and then a movie called Battle Beyond the Stars, which is kind of Seven Samurai in space. And from those, and Roger was in he was a signatory to the Writers Guild at that time. He later stopped being one. So I got $10,000 a movie, which was minimum back then. And so I had that much money, and I basically did what I think is a good idea for starting out filmmakers if you have any money, which is, what can I make well for the amount of money that I have in my pocket? And I knew these actors who were all turning 30, and I had seen a couple. There was a movie called For Jonas Who Will Be 25 in the year 2000,
Yeah, Swiss
in 1975, and I had seen Nashville, and I said, well, I'm not going to be able to move the camera much, so if I have a lot of people, I'll have a reason to cross-cut. I'll have a reason to cut.
Yeah.
A lot of characters like in Nashville. And so I said, well, it's going to be about a group of people turning 30. And a lot of the actors I knew weren't in the Actors Guild yet, but they were skilled. They'd done a lot of theater. They'd never been on screen. And also I'd read a couple things like in Time magazine saying, oh, all those 60s people, they're all becoming stockbrokers. And that just wasn't true of the people I knew.
Right.
Almost all of the men that I knew, they were downwardly mobile. They were taking jobs that were going to pay them less than their fathers had made in order to do something that they thought, be a teacher or be, one of them was a counselor at a halfway house for alcoholics. They were doing those kind of jobs.
Right.
And the women were upwardly mobile, and that they weren't just waiting to get married. They wanted to do jobs, and some of them were working in little city halls in Boston, and a bunch of them had been in Vista, not the SDS, but in Vista.
Yeah.
And so that it was a kind of interesting activist thing.
This was sort of a domestic Peace Corps.
Yeah.
Is that a good way to put it?
Yeah, and what they would kind of go, and a lot of
domestic meaning being in this country, not being a domestic.
Yeah, and they went to kind of cities with some problems, and there were a lot of those.
Yeah.
And what they often ran into is, as they tried to empower people, the local politicians got nervous. So they ran into this kind of, we're getting killed from two angles here. There's just the economics, which is tough on these people, but then even their politicians are nervous about us because we're helping them and not going through those politicians.
Right. So your friends and ultimately the characters in Return of the Secaucus Seven, this is set in the late 70s, so it's 4 or 5 years after the end of the Vietnam War, and there was this, the media just loves trying to show how, especially people who are on the left, will eventually sell out once we wave the dollar bill in front of their nose.
Right.
And so this film is about a group of friends who were activists during the Vietnam War. The war is over. They're getting ready to, or are turning 30. And if this is sounding like another film, you understand that Secaucus Seven is the forerunner to
The Big Chill.
The Big Chill.
Yeah.
But this is the sort of, this is the I don't know what to call this. The Godfather. I guess they call it the OG now.
Yeah. What's interesting is although they have the same format, because it's a kind of reunion weekend with these people who knew each other in college coming back together, it's very clear. I mean, The Big Chill is called The Big Chill for a reason.
Right.
It's about a group of people who are realizing that maybe they've lost their ideals or maybe never had them in the first place. Return of the Secaucus Seven is about people who the world hasn't turned out the way that they wanted it to, but they're trying to hold on to those ideals.
They're still themselves.
So they're similar groups of people, but they're kind of moving in different directions.
Right.
And it's why I never felt like, it's you have an Indian and a horse in a movie, and somebody stole your idea because they have an Indian and a horse and a cowboy in it. It's just a genre.
Right. No, in fact, whenever I see something taken from something I've done, I get really kind of excited.
Yeah, because somebody was paying attention.
Yes, yeah. and they're carrying on this storyline, this idea. It's quite an honor. I always take it. I never take it as like, hey, wait a minute.
Yeah,
you ripped me off.
Yeah.
No, I think the idea of art should be a constant in motion.
Yeah, re-examination of it. And
Yes.
I've met Larry Kazan a couple times, and we never really talked about this. But I imagine he just said, I could use that format for the people that I knew.
Yeah.
And there's been dozens of other TV shows and movies with that same kind of format of let's bring these people back together and see what's happening.
When you met Larry Kazan, you just didn't want to go there.
What filmmakers usually do is they say, where do you get your money? Do you have a phone number for me? And have you worked with this guy or that guy or this actor or this actress? Yeah.
See, I couldn't help it. David, I was at the at Sundance many, many years ago, and David Mamet ran into him. He said, hey, let's get lunch. And I'm like, the whole time I'm thinking, so I made an indie film called Canadian Bacon, where the American president is in some kind of hot water and needs a distraction,
right?
And decides to convince the country that Canada has become a threat,
right?
And we need to think about starting a war with Canada.
The Falklands strategy.
Yes. Yeah. And so I couldn't help myself during the lunch. I just said to him, okay, you've got to tell me, Wag the Dog is essentially your version of Canadian Bacon, same thematic thing. I'm just curious, because and I'm not upset. I'm like, I want to hear David Mamet say,
right, yeah, where he got it.
Yes, I'm a genius, and one of my genius ideas, some of it came from you, and he did. He copped to it, and he was very generous to me in acknowledging. That sort of thing.
Yeah, there was a screenwriter named Steve Tessich who died fairly young. He wrote that movie where all the kids are bicyclers and their dads work in the quarry and
Breaking Away.
Yeah. Nice screenwriter. And I was on a panel with him once, and he said, when I like a movie, it's because there's somebody I want to hang with. And that's not true of all my movies, but I always feel like there should be a way in. And what was interesting with Secaucus 7 is 4 or 5 different people came to me and said, I'm so glad you had such and such a character, because that gave me a way into the film. Even the guy who's kind of nerdy, there were people who said, well, yeah, I could see hanging out with those people because you had that character, and I could feel like, and they were nice to him. And what was interesting is each of them chose a different character. And so one of the things that I think about when and a lot of my movies are ensemble movies, there's a lot of characters, is what's the way in? I'm not the only audience for this. I am an audience for this. But what's the way in for anybody?
Right.
And do you want to hang with these people? Do you want to find out what happens to them next? And yeah, kind of almost always something is going to happen that's going to say, oh, that's messed up. With our government or with our culture or whatever. But the characters are usually, Secaucus 7 is one of the few where the people actually have political consciousness and talk about that stuff.
Right.
And a lot of the other ones, they're just living their lives. Right. But the audience can see, oh my God, this is a train wreck waiting to happen. And these people should wake up.
But at the core of your stories that you're telling, whether it's Lone Star, Silver City, Sunshine State, political corruption, capitalism are very much at play in these films. Whether it's about the coal miners in Matewan, in Sunshine State, it's about real estate developers. There's a story going on about people's lives. It's not 2 hours of real estate developers are awful. Yeah. But it is the backdrop. That exists in a way that, Hal Ashby did this in the film Shampoo so wonderfully. The whole film with Warren Beatty and Goldie Hawn, Lee Grant, takes place literally over 24 hours, the day that Nixon is elected in 1968. And throughout the film, you hear and see the whole campaign going on in the news. The TVs are on. No character in the film is practically saying a word about the evil that's about to happen on this day. Yeah. And you do this. You do this where that thread is there. You set the table. We feel the room in that sense. And I'm quoting more of your serious films, but you also have Brother from Another Planet, which deals with race. Liana, which I think was your second
Second
film.
movie, yeah.
Okay. So this is 1982, 3?
82, I think it was.
82.
Yeah.
So here's a film about the essence of the story is a college student falls in love with her professor, who is a woman.
Mm-hmm.
So you have a film dealing with gay and lesbian issues,
Mm-hmm.
but it's not an issue film, and it's 1983, and nobody is making this kind of film then.
No. The Personal Best came out the same year. And it's funny because I was in Tokyo. I was writing a movie for John Frankenheimer, and Scott Glenn was in it. And Scott Glenn came down to my hotel room, and I was doing some rewrites in Tokyo for Frankenheimer. And Scott, said, well, I just got here from another movie. And I had just told him the whole plot of Leanna, which was about to open. And I said, so what's Personal Best out? And he says, it's about track and field. And he played the coach, and kind of to his character, that's what it's about. The hell with these girls and their love affairs and all this kind of stuff.
Right.
But yeah, it was unusual at that time. But actually, it came out more. It's a woman who has kids. She's married. She has kids. And it came not so much out of sexual identity politics, but just knowing a lot of people who were breaking up, some of them married, some of them just in relationships. And the big difference was not whether they were married or just living together. It was whether they had kids or not. Mm. And that break, goodbye, have a nice life in one case, or we're going to court and fighting over the kid, or we're fighting over the kid but not in court, and this is the rest of your life, or until that kid leaves home. And then this other phenomenon of woman I had known who had married right out of high school, high school people I knew, or right out of college, and then gotten divorced five to 10 years later. And then all of a sudden they're on the relationship and job market for the first time in their lives in some cases. And what am I doing? I'm 35 and I'm going to a job interview and I've never done this before. And I'm going to bars and trying to meet people. This is just crazy. And I've got 2 kids.
Where'd the idea come from then to make it about a couple of the same gender being in love or attracted to each other?
At that time, there was a wrinkle that I got interested in. At that time, there were a lot of cases where women who had been married, had divorced, got custody, not sole custody, but principal custody of the kids, and the fathers would have visitation rights, then took up with a woman and started living with another woman. And the husbands brought them back into court. And at that time, judges would say, well, this is immoral. This is a terrible, model for your children. And they would give the kids back to the father. And the women's would end up with very limited visitation rights. And I wanted a situation where this woman who had, just been a housewife, basically, although in an academic town, which makes things somewhat different, because her husband's a professor, she's the one on the outside looking in. Because that was fairly rare in those days. And one of the few situations where mothers didn't just automatically get custody was this situation where all of a sudden they decided they were gay. And the legal profession wasn't having it in those days.
The judge was not going to allow the children to be in a gay home.
Yeah, exactly.
So therefore,
some things have changed.
There are some things are a little bit better.
Yeah.
Yes. But so here, let me ask you this. Most of your films do not seem to be made by Paramount, 20th Century Fox, Warner Brothers. You have had those films.
Really, Baby It's You and 8 Men Out are the two. And then
8 Men Out is
Sony
about the
did
Chicago
Limbo.
Black Sox.
Yeah, Sony did Limbo. Those 3 out of the 18 are the only real studio films.
Right. So why have you chosen to go through most of your filmmaking career that route? Because to us, the other independent filmmakers, you're a hero because you have this canon of film that got made and got made well with little or nothing in terms of the money or backing of the studio system.
Yeah, well, some of it's just luck. The timing of when we started making movies was good. Home video which had not been really a factor at all, came right after my second or third film. And there was a little 5 to 6 year period when home video companies were making money with their taking it out of their pocket and giving it to filmmakers, and then going and looking for a theatrical distributor.
Right.
So we got a little wind from that, and for $3 million, we could make a pretty good movie.
But I have had the sense that you've done this by choice, not.
It's a kind of, I don't know if I would call it choice. It's kind of a mutual understanding, which is that the studios pretty much understand most of what I make, and some of them really like the movies. I talked to executives, I love that movie. We couldn't have done anything with it, but I love that movie. They understand they're not set up to distribute a movie like that. Mm-hmm. It's just not broad enough. It's not, there's nothing they can exploit. They can't imagine the poster or the trailer that they would try to, squeeze it into a mall with. And then I understand that I really don't want to just be a director for hire who has to make the kind of, compromises in casting, in final cut, in, I know people who start out, kind of like bills through Congress, and by the time they come out the other end, they don't really resemble what was the original intention. It's a year of your life, one way or the other, and I don't want to spend a year and feel like I got to tell my friends, well, don't really go see that movie. Or I wish I could have taken my name off that movie.
Right.
I've been very lucky to be able to make 18 films. Lately, things have slowed down quite a bit. I haven't been able to get other people's money, OPM, for about the last 12 years or so.
Have you had screenplays that you've written?
Oh, yeah.
Ready to film?
Like most filmmakers, and especially screenwriters, I've got 5 or 6 things ready to go, just add money.
Yeah. Because the cast, if you look at the cast of any of your films, it seems like all kinds of actors, good actors, great actors want to work with you.
And some of them before, Chris Cooper and David Strathairn weren't known yet. Angela Bassett wasn't John Morton wasn't very well known yet.
No. The first time I saw Joe Morton was in Brother from Another Planet.
Yeah, wonderful actors. I've been really blessed with that. And the biggest, still the biggest compliment I get is that, my last movie, Edward James Olmos was the lead, is I get these kind of world-class actors to say, yes, I'll do 4 weeks with you for scale.
Mm-hmm. Right.
It's a good part. Looks like a good movie. I'll make time in my schedule.
So why can't the screenplays you have sitting on your desk, what has happened to the movies where they can't get made? Because clearly you can bring in a cast to these films.
I think the economics change, and also, I'm older than every producer I talk to now, and that's a factor. I mean, one of the reasons that there aren't as many female directors as there should be is generally the people who make the dollars and cents green light decisions. They're just not interested. Mm-hmm. They're not interested in those stories. They're not interested in those women.
Right.
It's they don't want to hang out with them, and go down a river with them or whatever they do,
Right.
So, so age is a factor. But basically, I think they just read them and they say, I don't, if we could make on this money, it would be an awful lot of work, and we're not sure we could make money on this. It's not easier for a whole lot of filmmakers. I'm not the only one.
No, I understand. Believe me, this is a big discussion these days amongst people who make movies. But say there's 5 or 6 screenplays sitting on your desk, there's got to be one that would make them money.
Well, it might, but they don't think so. And so,
what do you think?
Oh, I think if the thing is, the last 2 or 3 movies I've made, I've also had to self-distribute. I haven't even been able to get a distributor. So for Amigo, which is our movie, set during the Philippine-American War, with some very well-known actors in it, we couldn't get a distributor. For Go for Sisters, which is the one that Edward James Olmos and Lisa Gay Hamilton and some wonderful other actors are in, we couldn't get a distributor. And so you only get so far if you've only got $100,000 left to distribute the movie. And then, in Hollywood, they say, well, let's do the numbers. And so if they look at your numbers and how many people went to see your last movie and how much money it made, the numbers aren't impressive. And there's a lot of that kind of thinking in the movie business.
See, yeah, this is the part I don't get, because we are fortunate to live in a large country of 330 million people.
Yeah.
John, that means only 1 million need to like John Sayles' films. The other 329 million can go, honey, let's go see the Philippine-American War movie tonight. No, I don't think so. Fine. Okay. Yeah. But if 1 million came on opening weekend, where the average ticket price is $10 to $12, suddenly you have an opening weekend of $10 to $12 million. So it really begs the question to say, you're telling me that there are not 1 million of the 330 million that wouldn't go see this film by John Sayles with these actors, with this great storyline, that you're not going to get in any other movie.
We make that argument all the time. So
it doesn't work.
It hasn't worked. Yeah. So actually, I was down in Mexico a week ago, and I write fast, so I wrote a screenplay that I can make in 3 weeks. So I think once again, if I make another movie, it's going to be self-financed.
Self-financed, but you got to shoot it in 18 days.
12.
12 days. Wow.
It's doable.
But you're also the editor. You're your own editor.
Yeah.
That helps.
And when you're the writer, the director, and the editor, you do an awful lot of editing in the screenwriting, and you do an awful lot of editing as your director.
While you're filming it. That's correct.
You just, I often, an actor will be saying, well, you're moving the camera. Wait, I only did 3 takes, and I blew a line every take. And I say, you blew a different line every take, and we've got 3 angles of this thing, and I've got it.
Right.
I've already cut it in my head, and it's wonderful. Trust me.
Right.
And the nice thing is, for the actors, their deal is just with me. So if they trust me, they're okay. So it's not a deal with me, studio people who may change during the making of the movie in a focus group in Milwaukee.
Right.
And so where's the rest of me when I see the movie is I'm going to use their best stuff, and if they trust me, pretty much I'm going to take care of them.
So when you say self-financed, you're going to have to self-finance your next film.
Yeah.
I'm assuming you're not loaded.
Yeah, I think I can get $500,000 together.
You can, both between people mortgaging for the 3rd time your house.
Yeah, I don't mortgage, but John Cassavetes did a lot of mortgaging, I guess. I talked to a couple of his kids once, and they said, we always hated it when he made movies because, we couldn't sleep in our rooms because all the coats and equipment were in there, and we had to make peanut butter sandwiches for everybody,
If you lived in France or Italy or Canada, you'd be considered a national treasure for the work you've done, and the nation would decide that we need to support artists like this, and there would be financing available.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting. Some of them, I think Germany for a long time, they may still have this, is once you made a couple movies, they based how, there was just a pot of money. And if you made 15% of the revenue last year, you could get 15% of the pot this year for your next film.
Right.
If you made 3%, you could, and so there were filmmakers who started out and every movie was a little smaller, because they got less popular or whatever, but they could still make something.
They could still make their movies.
Yeah.
So what's your level of frustration with this?
I'm very lucky. I'm on this book tour for Yellow Earth, this new novel that I've written, and my last 2 novels have been written during Writers Guild of America strikes, so I can't work for somebody else. And we have a good long strike. This one is only about 450 pages. The one before, A Moment in the Sun, was over 1,000 pages, and that was a long strike. Not that I love having strikes, but, it's like, okay, well, I've got something else I can do, and I can tell this story. Right.
And by the way, and that was a great book. And I just got this last night, your new book, Yellow Earth. And these novels, I could already tell from this one, you write in epic scope.
I mean,
it's not a 12-day movie.
No. It's people say, "So, is this going to be a movie?" And I say, "Well, yeah. If some oil and gas company wants to let me make them look bad and watch them drill and frack up in the the high plains, sure. But yeah, I tend to in the books actually be even more mosaic than in the films and have even more characters and more points of view. And so it does tend to spread.
Yeah, just explain the plot of this current book. You alluded to it there with the oil and gas companies.
Yellow Earth is set during the kind of Bakken shale oil boom and bust, up mostly in North Dakota, up into Canada a little bit, that happened from 2007, let's say, to 2012. And the bust wasn't anything terrible. It was just that fracking was so successful, and that gas and oil, resource was so successful, at least at putting more, oil on the market, that the price went down. So it was, they were drilling like crazy back when it was $4 a gallon at the pump. As it started to dip down because of their success, down below 380, 375, it doesn't make an economic sense anymore.
Right.
But
the plot of this book is
the invasion of a city that was a city of 15,000 people, losing its young people, not much new industry, and all of a sudden there's this discovery, and in 6 months there's 45,000 people. And most of those 30,000 who just showed up are men without women, and they're camp followers. And what happens to a place like that? It's like the Yukon gold rush, and there's a lot of money to be made for certain people. It affects the people who are already there. It affects the people who come and go. And everybody's wages go up except for cops and teachers and, public employees, and they're just screwed because cost of living goes up as well. And your rental goes up, and,
they're doing the job of 3 people now, each of them, because the classrooms are larger.
Yeah.
There's more people. So
the cops don't get another deputy necessarily, and they've already got a huge county to cover. About half of the book takes place on the neighboring Indian reservation, which also has some oil and gas on it. And it's based on a reservation that was kind of one north of Standing Rock. So before the pipeline crisis, there was this. We've got oil under us, and what do we do about it?
And Yellow Earth refers to...
It's the name of the town. It's the name of this small city. And that has gone through, that area of the country has had 4 booms and busts. The first one being beaver pelts, and then the buffalo, and then cattle, and then there were these bonanza farms, if you ever see Days of Heaven. That was a bonanza farm where all these immigrants came and worked on it, and those eventually were not economically viable either. And then it left this kind of high plains with huge, properties and ranches, but still not a whole lot of profit in them until something like this, mineral find shows up.
Well, I'm really excited to be able to read this book, because I could tell just starting it that you've written another book that if it were a film, you'd need a $50 million budget.
Or a miniseries, yeah.
Would you be okay with that, though, if somebody bought your book from you, even though you wrote the book, and they made it into a movie? Would you give that up, really? Because it is your story?
Nobody has made anything of any of my books yet, and not too many people have asked. They usually look at it and they say, well, we're not interested in this subject, or this would be too much money, or whatever. It would be tough. I tend to say, well, I'd like to have at least some, finger left in it, so it doesn't go in a totally different direction. My friend Elliot Azanoff, who wrote the book of 8 Men Out and was a blacklisted Hollywood writer for a while, right after the Cuban Revolution, he was brought down to help write a movie about the Cuban Revolution. And Fidel came to the set one day and handed out cigars and everything like that. And it was being financed by, I think it was the Partagas family. And so he wrote on this, and they shot some footage and everything like that. And then they said, well, you're the screenwriter. We don't need you anymore. We're shooting. And he went home. And then, about 6 months later, he saw this film, and it was totally anti-Castro. And what had happened is the cigar magnate had gotten the last of his family out and the footage and cut it into a totally opposed to what it started out movie. Wow. And that can happen with a project. And so, it's a little like renting your kids out.
Yeah. You'd rather keep the story in your hands.
Yeah.
And someone give you $50 million.
Exactly. Yeah. And as I said, many of my novels would make good
Yes.
miniseries. Very few would make a good single movie.
Right, right. So where does you and I have crossed paths a few times over the years, and I remember one of those times was we were at the Sundance Film Festival, and it was what was the year of the first Iraq War, the Bush the first?
Yeah, I forget the year.
Whenever
but
that
I remember
was,
the
remember we
first
were
one,
there.
yeah. It was
and-
right when it was just about to be voted on or something
Yes,
like that.
yes. And so a few of us had an idea of why don't we
Pam Yates, I think, was
Pam
there.
Yates was one of them, and she and I and a few others and you. Why don't we ask the attendees here at the festival I think it was maybe at the awards ceremony, just to take a voice vote to show our opposition to invading another country, and I believe you were the master of ceremonies. If my mind is, and so we were all convinced that these filmmakers and the others attending Sundance would do a voice vote against the war in Iraq.
I wasn't convinced. I figured, look, this is a bunch of white people in parkas, and they're here to meet Cameron Diaz or whatever they're here to do.
Okay,
and then
so-
some of them may be into it, but to get a joint resolution from that bunch of people.
Yeah.
But I thought it would be an interesting thing just to see what the
would
reaction
happen.
was.
Now I remember you telling us this isn't going to go well, and I remember we were so naive and thinking, oh no, people will be against this war, and so I remember you standing there, and you started to say, we just thought we would just take a, and people started booing, and then you said, okay, maybe we should, somebody we should vote on whether we should vote.
Yeah, a vote to see if we have a vote, and people didn't want to have a vote.
People didn't want to have a vote. They didn't even want to vote on this. And I felt so bad for you because Pam and I and the others have felt like, oh, poor John is up there dying a million deaths.
If I had wanted to be an MC, it would have been tough on me. If I had wanted to be Bob Barker, that was not what I wanted to be. Yeah.
No.
And it was actually a pretty interesting bunch of people who won awards and stuff that year. So,
Right.
But it's not my favorite. Yeah, they asked me at the last minute if I would be the MC, and it's not my favorite thing to do anyway. But
right. So,
but I think it is an interesting thing is assuming that people are even close to being on the same page as you are politically. You just can't assume that.
No, I've learned that.
You really, and I think, the more information people have, maybe the more likely they are to agree with you, but not necessarily, as we now know, there are red facts and blue facts and facts from outer space, and, people have their, it's something I deal with quite a bit in both of my books and movies, which is, a lot of drama comes from contention. And some of that is just, we both want the same thing and we can't both have it.
Right.
But there's also this kind of contention that's caused because you believe in a totally different world than I do. And we can't even talk. There's because we don't even believe we're I can't understand why you're even bothering to be in my way here. And you can't understand why I'm bothering to try to push you around.
So how are you getting through the Trump era that we're now in? And I mean, I think it's helped. I got to go to college and I didn't take any history classes. And since then, I've written over 100 screenplays for other people and for myself. And I've written now 6 novels. I've written one after this, actually, that's done. And a lot of them have a historical, part of them. So I've read a lot of history now. And I'm comforted by 2 things. One is there's not a golden age that I wish I could go back to, and that Franklin Roosevelt went through this shit. He was excoriated, and if he hadn't had the shock and awe of A, the Depression, and B, World War II, he would have lasted 4 years and he would have been out of there. The opposition to him, was so dug in, and that he was a communist and all this kind of stuff. Right.
And the other thing that's comforting to me is that so far, Trump hasn't made any friends in the military.
Right.
And that we haven't really had a real coup since the Civil War.
Right.
and that it's just not a tradition within our military.
Right.
And until he has time to replace all the people who run the military now with people who are willing to sacrifice the country for their own ambition, and that takes a while in a bureaucracy like the military. If the Democrats are able to win this next election and it's close, he's not leaving.
Right. It's,
He's going to contest it, and he's got months to sit there and just say, no, those results aren't right.
He'll say they're rigged.
Yeah.
Look at Iowa. They were trying to rig it there.
Yeah.
He'll point to everything.
Yeah.
And I am a firm believer of this. 3 years ago, I had a Broadway show I did, and I said this during the show, that he will not leave. So we're going to have a problem. Mm-hmm. Even when we vote him out, we're going to have a problem.
Mm-hmm. People worried about Nixon not leaving.
They were.
And
there were contingency plans within the military because they were afraid that Nixon was losing his mind.
He apparently made a very late night call. He'd been knocking back a few. And I think it was the head of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. And he said, I want to bomb Syria. I forget what Syria had done that he wanted. And the guy thought fast, and he said, yes, Mr. President, as soon as the sky's clear. He knew Nixon wasn't going to go on the Weather Channel, which may not have existed yet.
Right.
And he had a meeting first thing the next morning with the other Joint Chiefs, and he said, okay, nobody takes a direct order from this guy. And it was in his last 2 weeks when he was really falling apart.
Yeah.
So there was this.
They were worried.
What are we going to do with this guy if he just goes off the rail?
I have felt from the beginning, and now we learn from this new book that's out, that Trump's first meeting with the generals, where he called them a bunch of losers,
right,
babies, disgusting. I mean, it was really,
These are not guys who are used to being talked to that way.
No,
by anybody.
But he was really, he started talking trash about them in the first week, and I thought, okay, this is good, because this means the generals, that briefcase, they always have a soldier with the president who's carrying the briefcase with the nuclear codes, so they can be launched within seconds. I've been convinced from the beginning the generals have never put the accurate codes in there. There's a piece of paper in there, and there's numbers on it.
Yeah.
But it's the pizza or something else.
Yeah, you have to use a capital B.
Yeah, there's no way. There's no way the codes are in that briefcase. I'm telling you.
I hope not.
But okay, so I see. So your comfort comes from these two things.
But that doesn't mean things are good. It's just that it's I'm glad I didn't have to live through the Civil War. It was necessary, unfortunately.
Yeah.
I hope we don't have to live through another one, but this shit happens, and just because you have a nice 12-year period when things kind of go along, an unfortunate thing that just happens in general. And we were talking about the Iowa caucuses earlier, is that horrendous government makes people accept mediocre to bad government. And so people say, well, this guy's not so bad. let's be satisfied with voting for him, or her in whatever case.
I'm afraid the collapse and the chaos of Iowa has put people into a headspace now of, okay, we've got to play it safe here. We just got to.
Yeah.
And I'm like, no, really now in moments like this in history is not when you play it safe.
Yeah.
It's when you really organize with other people and you stand up and you fight for the things that you believe in. I mean,
has there been a truly contested convention in our lifetime?
In our lifetime,
because I know in 1932, when Roosevelt got in, it was a lot of votes. It was like the fifth ballot or something like that, and he had to do a lot of getting in bed with Father Coughlin and all these kind of crazy, the Pendergast machine and all these kind of who he dumped within the next 4 years, but he needed to make those alliances and make some dirty deals.
My guess is that none of the Democrats who are running, it's very possible that none of them will have over 50% of the vote when they go to the convention. And this is why the frayed alliance between Sanders and Warren needs to come back together. Because by themselves, they may not be able to get the 50 plus 1% at the convention. And the Democrats, the old guard, have set this convention up to where there's only going to be one on the first ballot, just one true vote that represents how the people voted. If there is not a 51% on that vote, a candidate with 51%, on the second ballot, they go back to the old way where the superdelegates, the party hacks, come in, they get the vote. And they will then pick not who the American people want, but who they want.
Well, Americans didn't get to vote for their senators directly until pretty deeply into the 1900s.
1911, 1913, something like that.
It was the state assemblies or something like that.
Right. So what are you going to do this year? Are you doing anything? Are you just saying?
I just sent some money to Stacey Abrams. That's good. That's the general thing that you can do, which is she's working to make sure people who should be able to vote do get to vote.
Get to vote
everywhere.
Yeah, she's leading the parade on that.
I haven't decided on a candidate yet. I'm kind of from the Sanders Warren wing. As far as the thing is, there is what the candidates say they want to do and would try to do. So little of that is what I think they, even with a Democratic Congress, is what I think they'll be able to do. So you have to kind of mitigate that, So do you? But I also don't think that kind of going with somebody who's safe and is just going to kind of sit there and business as usual is going to get you anything you want either.
No, I think Trump will crush that person.
Yeah. And I think if the Democrats get in, I want he didn't call me up, but I could have told Obama he wasn't going to get any cooperation those first 4 years he was in.
Yeah.
And this idea of,
Kumbaya.
the good of the country wasn't going to work. But I think they have to, if they got enough of a majority, it's time for Puerto Rico to be a state. It's time for Washington, D.C. to be a state. Why are there two Dakotas? There are two Dakotas because the Republicans got, an extra pair of senators out of it.
Right.
It was just Dakota territory.
Right.
We've got states that big.
Right.
It wasn't because Texas didn't want a big state. So I think they do have to do some democratic things. Puerto Rico should be treated at least as well as Alabama the next time there's a hurricane.
You think so?
Yeah. We took them over and we annexed them. I think it was 1898 to 1900. It was in my last book when we annexed the Philippines and Guam, and because they weren't protected by the there was a thing, an amendment when the kind of hawks were saying we've got to save the poor Cuban people from those evil Dagos from Spain, And one senator stood up and said, okay, put it in writing that you're not doing this just to annex Cuba, as a territory. And they said, sure, we'll put it in writing. But nobody knew what Puerto Rico or Philippines or Guam were, so they weren't covered by the thing. And so we just grabbed those things.
Right.
So the Puerto Ricans have had to put up with us for that long, and they've gotten to the point where they've just kind of realized, if we're going to get anything more out of this relationship, I guess we have to be a state, even if we're, a poor state.
Aren't you sort of itching to want to be making a movie right now with the climate we're in and everything going on? Or
yeah,
I'm not trying to tell you to, you've done enough.
Yeah,
You're in the National Film Registry.
I'm hoping that the next thing I make, this 3-week movie, will in some ways be about immigration. I'm always interested in immigration. Most of my relatives didn't get here until about 1900.
Where are they from?
Germany, Ireland, but not the first wave of Germans and Irish who came.
The slacker ones that came later.
Yeah.
Kind of were trying to...
Yeah.
We got to get down to the docks one of these days.
And, both of my grandfathers were cops, and so they, they must have had, connections on the police force.
Right.
I think one of the first of them actually got the starter job, which was picking up the horse shit on the street. which was a city job back when there were only horses and no cars, and you made your way from there to the fire department or the police department. But I'm interested in this. I'm interested in assimilation. Brother from Another Planet, Baby It's You. They're about assimilation. What do you give up when you join this new thing? And when you become, in the case of the Brother from Another Planet, when you become a Homo sapiens, a member of this particular tribe. But when you become an American, what do you have to give up? Do you give up your language? Do you give up your religion? Do you become, Reformed instead of Orthodox? And do you get enough back to make that worth it? To jettison your culture.
Right.
And it's an interesting question. I know a lot of people, who don't speak Spanish anymore, and their parents and grandparents did. And it just they didn't want me to.
This is very interesting. You're essentially you're a working class white guy, and so many of your films, they're not. It doesn't have the sense of this is the typical liberal white person making the important story. That we should make.
I've never put Nobody Knows the Trouble I've Seen on the soundtrack.
But with all the talk of how Oscar's so white and all the nominees, most of the nominees being white people, you consistently from the beginning have had African Americans and Latinos playing significant roles in your film, women playing significant roles. You were, really out there and ahead of all this, not just to be down with the cause, but simply because you wanted to tell these stories. Well, as you said, your last film is in Spanish.
Well, part of it's in Spanish, and it's the leads are a Mexican American, ex-cop who's suffering from macular degeneration, and two African American women who grew up together, doing this kind of crime caper together, trying to find the son of one who's in trouble.
But do you get what I'm saying? You don't do this to sort of wear it on your sleeve. It just
when
seems
I
to be
wrote it,
part
I
of your...
didn't know they were going to be African American. There were just two actresses I wanted to work with.
Right.
But a lot of it truly is when I got into movies, what interested me, and I really like traditional movies and everything like that as well. I love Westerns and all that kind of stuff. It was, well, where are these other people that are in my life that I never see on the screen? So, Secaucus Seven is just all white people who went to school together or whatever, but I'd never seen them on the screen. Brother from Another Planet, those are people I know, but I'd never seen them on the screen. How much of our culture is and our language is affected by the Latino community, and that long, strange dance between Mexico and the United States, it's just, but where were they on the screen? I got to work with Rita Moreno and in this movie Casa de los Babies, and she spoke Spanish in it. And she said, this is the first time I've ever spoken Spanish, for the whole part in the movie. Because she said, usually it's, why did you people take our gold? And she's played Indians, and she was a little Thai girl in The King and I and whatever. But it was the first time she got to act in Spanish. Just there weren't any parts.
Wow. Something just filtered back into my head here. I asked you at the beginning of the podcast about your first jobs, and you mentioned that you had written the original Piranha for Roger Corman, the king of the B movies.
Yeah.
And of course, Piranha is one of the great B movies of all time. And then I asked you if you were a truck driver. You said no. And I realized where the two wires got crossed, because Piranha 2 is being filmed. I'll tell you how I know this story. The sequel to your Piranha is being filmed down in the Caribbean somewhere, and Roger Corman shows up and just on day 1 or 2 just absolutely hates what the director is doing. And so Roger Corman. I've had him at my film festival, and he's quite the character and quite a very, very smart individual. And he just fires the director just like that. It was like after 2 days, and he's looking around, and this is like lanky kid, really. What do you do? What do you do here? And the kid says, I'm like the assistant to the second AD, or I don't know, whatever it was. You're the director now. Start directing. And he starts directing the film. And the kid's name is James Cameron. And
yeah, it was actually on. James was working.
Oh, you know the story then.
He was working in the art department on Battle Beyond the Stars, which was this space movie
that you wrote.
And Roger just kind of saw something he was drawing and made him the production designer overnight. And then he gave him the Piranha job.
And then he was there for the Piranha.
And then he fired him off that. And James tried to take his name off of Piranha too.
Right.
I think. But he says they were shooting in Italy, not in the Caribbean. And that Roger didn't cancel his hotel room, and so he hung out for another week on the production's nickel, and he ate food off other people's room service trays that they would put out, and he wrote the first draft of the Terminator movie.
Is that right? During that week,
Yeah.
after he's been fired from Piranha 2.
Yeah.
That's amazing. Daddy did not know this part of the story. I knew that he told me that he grew up in Canada.
Yeah.
That's where he was a truck driver.
Moose Jaw or something. Yeah.
Graduated from high school, was a truck driver, did all kinds of, he might have even worked in a hospital, but did all kinds of very low-end working class jobs that he wasn't being paid much. Decided he really was interested in film, went to Southern California, didn't go to film school, but started going to the library at USC. And started asking to look at things, and he just read and then watched old films, and eventually got into the Roger Corman universe.
Yeah, the working on those films as a writer was a great education, because most of the filmmakers were making their first or second movie. There wasn't much money, and so what you saw as a writer, because they were always calling you up and say, "Help! I've only got $800,000 to make this epic that you've written." You really got to see the nuts and bolts, and Roger and a woman named Frances Dole, who was his assistant. That was all you had to deal with. You didn't have to deal with a room full of executives and marketing people and stuff like that, and they knew their horror movies. And so, the notes that you got for them were right to the point. There were very few of them. And they would be things like, wait another 3 minutes before we have another attack. The audience needs a little more time to chill before we eat anybody's feet off.
For young people who are listening to this, who are thinking that they'd like to make a movie or whatever, what do you say when young people approach you, they ask you about filmmaking, whatever?
The great thing is, as I say, I didn't go to film school, so my filmmaking, and you see my first couple movies, and they're pretty raw in some ways, and the human behavior is good, but often the technical stuff is very, very raw,
which, in my opinion, helped it.
Yeah, the feeling of the tone of the movie is now that video is how you make movies. It used to be hard to rent a film camera. They wouldn't even let you have it.
Right. No, you couldn't own one.
You had to kind of sneak it out of there on the weekends.
So you did that too.
Well,
so my first film. So you go in there on Friday.
Robert Downey's father was famous for that. He always rented the camera on Friday, and you got Sunday for free.
Yeah, and you had to bring it back Monday, but you had either till noon or 5, depending on the house. That you could.
So you shoot. So you shoot something on the block.
You got 4 days of shooting.
Yeah,
Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday for 1 day of rent.
Yeah,
that's
you were shooting on short ends.
That's right. I got so many people to give me.
Paul Bartel used to talk about shooting on long short ends, which meant that it was stolen film.
So explain what that means. That
a short end is if you have an 8-minute scene, reels used to be 10 minutes long. And so if you have an 8-minute scene, there's 2 minutes that, you can't shoot another take that's 8 minutes long. So there's 2 minutes of unexposed film on there.
Yes.
So you cut it off and you put it in a smaller roll, and you end up having a bunch of these little 2-minute pieces. And, and maybe it's a 4-minute piece, and And we shot a lot of Baby It's You on short ends from King of Comedy. Because the guy, Bobby Colesbury, who was our production manager, had worked on that as well.
Right.
And they were real short ends, but there was a lot of improv in that movie, and some long improv, and we might end up with a 3 or 4 minute short end.
In my first film, in Roger Me, I was editing it down in Washington D.C., and I met this husband and wife team that produced segments for 60 Minutes. The Fine, Mr. and Mrs. Fine, And back then, 60 Minutes was shot on film, 60 millimeter, and I was shooting my film on 60 millimeter film. And they said, hey, we have these short ends, like a minute, 2 minutes of footage that's not exposed yet, Kodak footage. And you can have the film, and you can do short ends. And so I'd be shooting something in Roger Me that was like a minute long, 2 minutes long, because that's all I had, because I didn't have the money to go buy
It's tough in documentary. You want it to be like an establishing shot or something. Yes. You don't want to get into an interview and say, I'm sorry, we have to change reels 5 times.
So your advice to young people
is do it. You can make a movie on your phone now. Now, it's not necessarily going to be a movie that you can release, but do it with people aren't very good actors. Shoot a scene. Try different angles. See, you can get something up on its feet for nothing.
Yes,
now.
on your phone.
On your phone.
Now, for sound, I always tell these students or young people, sound is actually more important than picture.
Yeah. And the microphone. Remember, the microphone's right next to the lens.
Right.
So usually the guy who's feeding the lines is really loud, and the person who's on screen is not so
What's
loud.
your advice for that if they don't have money for all the equipment or whatever to get good sound? Because the camera, it may be back a ways or whatever. So it's...
if you have somebody who's good at computers, put another phone near the guy with its microphone down, and you can dump that sound over onto the other thing.
There you go.
You can figure this stuff out, but basically it's to learn the gig. And if, maybe you make a 5-minute version of a scene that's going to be in your movie, and you got something to show. There's people who's put something on YouTube and they get a contract to make a webcast of it, and it ends up being a feature.
Right.
You can do the thing. Now, what's difficult now is getting distribution. That's where the bottleneck is. And some of it is just there's 52 weeks in the year. There's only so many screens that will show something that's non-Hollywood.
So you're talking about, theatrical distribution is difficult.
Whereas, the web, you can give it away if you want to. This is, the unfortunate thing about movies as opposed to music is I know a lot of, people who are in bands, and they make their money touring. They don't sell records anymore, They make their money touring. If they get a little following, they can sell some merchandise and stuff like that, and they can make some money back, and some of them even make a living at it.
Right.
It's a lot of traveling, but and they're driving a bus or driving a van or whatever, but they can do it.
I've done this.
You can't do that with a movie.
No, but I have helped to reconstruct a couple old movie theaters in Michigan, and I've made them nonprofits. And what I've done, and I want to do more of this, is I've invited filmmakers who don't have distribution to come to my theater. I have 600 seats. You promote it, we'll promote it, whatever. We'll see what kind of crowd we get. And I think the people in the town are used to now. They know I'm not going to bring, some crappy crap thing that's going to be, worth coming to. But we've had nights where we've had the all 600 seats full for $10 a seat, and the $6,000. Basically, we'll keep 10, 20,
sell popcorn.
But mostly that. I give the majority of the money to the filmmaker. Yeah. They walk out of our theater with $4,000 to $6,000.
Yeah. Hey, mall,
for a night.
Mall theaters mostly make their money on the popcorn. Yeah. Which is why they don't want cries and whispers every week.
Yeah. and that's why one of my rules of my theater is that you never think about we're going to make our money off the popcorn. And just to make sure that if after I'm gone, if anybody, I have we have permanent concession prices where popcorn at my theater is $2.
Good.
Pop, what we call pop soda, is $2. And you can get candy for as low as $1. That way the theater would never survive.
Right.
That forces us to bring only good movies
and
people are going to see.
Sell tickets, yeah.
And we're going to make our money on the movies, not the popcorn. It's I've always thought it was debasing to us as filmmakers to hear theaters saying, we make our money on the popcorn.
Yeah.
You should be making it because I made a pretty good movie and people want to see it.
Yeah.
But
it's, the good thing about the technology being, it's democratized filmmaking anyway.
Yes, right.
Now, the tough thing is, of course, is there's a lot more competition. When I started out, there might be 6 independent movies. There wasn't Sundance yet when I started. That came a couple of years later. There might be 6 movies. And so if there were 6 independent movie distributors, the heads of the companies would watch anything with sprocket holes. And then within 10 years, it was like stand in line and they'd pop a cassette in and watch 10 minutes of it and make their decision. For instance, podcast is a wonderfully democratizing thing.
Right.
There's a lot of really great podcasts out there, and some beautifully produced and some just interesting, even though they're much more raw and not as much production or whatever, but just really interesting stuff. And, your sponsors here or whatever, what do you call them? Not
Anchor.
Anchor.
Yeah, they're underwriters. What they do is, because I don't allow ads on this, but I will thank the underwriter.
Yeah.
And in this case, in many of our shows, it's this thing called Anchor.
Yeah.
Which will literally, you go to their site and they will show you how to do a podcast. They will give you some training. And then if you want to put it out there on Apple and the big places.
It's like Pod School, very quick Pod School.
Very quick
and
pod
that's
school,
great.
And a means of distribution.
Yeah.
And a means of distribution where you don't have to put up money to have it on Apple or Spotify. And it will rise or fall based on how good of a job you're doing.
Because you have an interesting story to tell doesn't mean you know how to do all that stuff.
No. It's very true. There are now 750,000 podcasts worldwide. So this is not.
Yeah, well, this is the other thing, which is there's only 52 weeks in the year. There's only so many hours in a day. There's a lot of stuff coming at us.
Right.
There's a lot of things that can engage our attention. And so, the golden age of movies was an age when their competition at first was nothing.
Right.
And then it was radio.
Right.
And then finally TV came in and they had to really kind of share the spotlight for a while and kind of made their peace with TV, and some of the same companies got involved. And now with the web and young people, most of them not really caring how big the screen is that they see something on. They'll watch something on their phone that I would never watch it on anything but a big movie screen.
Right.
Watching 1917 on your phone is,
don't do that.
Like,
don't do
that.
No.
But there's a lot of competition.
Yeah.
For
I got to tell you though,
6 hours of people's attention a week.
You've given me an idea here. That when you said that about how bands and hip hop and whatever, they now make their money touring, maybe if filmmakers toured with their films, it might take 6 months to travel crisscross the country or whatever. But my experience, again, when I've had filmmakers bring their film to my theater, it's in Traverse City, Michigan, and they walk out of there with $4,000 to $6,000 of the box office. The film festivals used to be that, mostly documentaries that makers that I knew. I think it might have been Julia Reichert, one of her first films. We saw her in Rotterdam, and she was on tour with her first or second film, and we gave her the festival wrap, which is go through the schedule and see where the free lunches are. Bring Tupperware. And look at festivals that at least see where you can crash,
fly you there and fly you back, so you don't get stuck anywhere.
Right.
And do it. This is your first one. Do it for a year, and then make something else. Because if you're still touring in the second year, you're not a filmmaker anymore. You're just still touring with the first movie. Yeah.
Right. No, you don't want to do that for too long. But I'm just saying, if you went to 50 theaters and you got $6,000 from the box office, that's $300,000. Am I right? Did I do the math right?
Yeah. If you can make a movie for $300,000 and you have that other 6 months to go around. Yeah. Now one of the things, one of my problems is that I've got hooked on working with professionals. So my first movie, nobody was in the guild yet. Neither my crew nor my actors. By the second movie, people started to being in the actors, guild. And then by my third movie, people were professional. And so if you're paying union wages and working on a union schedule, it gets more expensive.
Yeah.
And I'm fine with that. I'm in 4 guilds now. I'm a former meat packer, all that kind of stuff. And quite honestly, the movie business is a nightmare without unions. It can get pretty bad even with them.
Yes, very dark.
So it's something that's a good thing, but it does knock the price up.
Yeah.
Unless you're making something with a bunch of kids.
Yeah, but the guilds all have low budget contracts that are fairly decent in terms of, because I make all my films, I make them that way.
Yeah, Go for Sisters,
make them union.
We qualified, besides being just under $1 million, they have a thing for if you have, more than 50% or some percent, females, people of color, or old people. It's another category now. And we had like 97% on that film. And so, we were so qualified for it. But it still cost $1 million.
Yeah.
And $1 million is, as they say, pretty soon you're talking about real money.
That's
especially
right.
if it's your own.
Right.
And you don't get paid as much as you used to.
Right.
Like everybody else in America.
As you mentioned a few minutes ago, where do people find time with everything that's hitting them, including 750,000 podcasts? And I'm sure there's people listening to this right now that need to get back to helping the kids with the homework, putting them to bed, finishing the dishes, whatever it is they're doing. But I would be remiss if I did not bring up this final point to you, and that is when I first saw you, I believe it was with Secaucus Seven. You had your producer with you, and I went to Ann Arbor a lot, and a lot of filmmakers came. And I saw something with you, the producer, and again, this is late 70s, early 80s, and it's something I hadn't seen before at that time, and it was a woman. Your producer was a woman, and I believe her name was Maggie.
Maggie Renzi.
Maggie Renzi.
Yeah, we're married now.
And
we lived together for about 35 years, and then we finally got married to get her on my health plan.
That's I thought for sure you'd be the last 2 people that would ever get married, but no. But you've been in this relationship for what would it be now? It'd be
longer than we weren't together. At that point.
Yeah. So, and I assume you met each other as you did your acting friends there in
we actually
college.
went to the same college, and we didn't know each other at college, but we got together shortly after.
But what was amazing to this, and I remember about that night, is that a woman was a producer. This is just something that, to this day, I mean, there are more women who are producers, but still, what they say last year? They were so happy that 10% of the top films were directed by women. 10% were happy about that. Most years, it's 4% are directed by women, and not that many more are produced by women. It's still so rare. In this business. But there you were in 1979 in your first film being produced and co-produced with Maggie, and she has done that through all of the. So first of all, how's that worked out? And second of all, what can we say to the young women who are listening to this, because they usually hear these male voices when we're talking about making movies, and I have been advocating for this for a long time. In fact, my film festival a few years ago, I said, we're only going to show films directed by women. And people said, well, you're not going to find enough films. I said, well, then we'll have a smaller festival this year. Because I'm tired of this. I'm not going to do it anymore. And I made the poster for that festival a few years ago. It was the 100. It was our theater was 100 years old, and I said 100 years of. Oh, geez, I forgot what it said across the top, but it was. Do you remember this? It was 100 years of. Cineman. Yeah, that was it. Yeah, 100 years of Cineman, and it was the directors of the best films of the 100 years. Won the Oscar before the Oscars. It was the highest grossing film. And the whole poster is literally the faces of 99 men and one woman, Catherine Bigelow. That was it. And I have been advocating for this. I was on the board of the Oscars for 3 years. I was advocating for it then, and things have gotten a little bit better, but not a whole lot better. So here you are with your films produced from the beginning.
For me, once again, I think it's the Nike saying, just do it. You do it on whatever level you can. And
you're saying this to the young women now who are listening to this.
Yeah, and it's, I always used to say, the workers don't have to, only, control the means of production, but also of distribution and exhibition. And, how many women are in distribution? How many women are the heads of distribution companies? Yeah. You don't have to be a filmmaker.
Probably none.
Yeah. And
how many women own theater chains?
Yeah.
I'm going to guess none.
And there's no reason why not, if you kind of want to go in and, get in the fight and do it. So it's not just director, even though that's an important job.
Right.
What I see is that, there is this chicken and an egg argument, which is, female stars get paid less because their movies make less money. I just think, as I said before, I think it's because the people making the decisions just aren't interested in those people and those stories. They just don't see them.
The people making the decisions. You use the word people, it's a euphemism for men.
Yeah. The people at the very top.
Yes, because the men who are making
quite
decisions.
honestly, most of the producers, the middle level producers that I deal with, who are story analysts and kind of working on projects, are women.
Yes, in the indie world now. Yes,
but this is the studios too. But the people who actually run the studios aren't, and they're finally the people who have the final green light.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's just kind of, if the system doesn't want you, invent your own system.
Yeah.
And it's not easy, men,
the word to men is be supportive of this.
Be supportive. If you're interested in the movie, check it out. What you did with that festival is very important. We went up to a festival in, I think it was Bend, Oregon, and Maggie was asked to be on a woman in film panel. She says, "Okay, this is the last woman in film panel I'm on."
Right.
And she said, "Okay, let's take the the catalog for this festival, and let's count, and basically it was maybe 12% of the films, including documentaries where there are more women involved, were by women,
which is
and
but they had the women in film segment there, the panel. Yeah. So here's what I did that year when it was just films by women. I had in the program book a little section called "Men in Film."
Yeah.
And we actually
it was like a joke, right?
But we actually had a panel of men describing the hardships that they have making their movies.
Yeah.
And it was it's part of my own sense of humor, but I'm also making a point.
One of the important things is, like a couple of years after I got started, and right about the time you got started, Spike Lee got started.
Yes.
Now there had been black directors before, but Spike is a very visible guy, and two important things he did. First of all, he got so visible that a kid who's thinking like, well, black people don't get to make movies, gets to see Spike Lee and says, "Oh shit, that guy got to make movies." They may not be the movies I would make if I got to make movies, but he got to make movies. Why not me? And the other thing that he did that was important, here in New York, because most of his movies were shot here, was that he started getting black men and women to work on his crew. And they wouldn't necessarily be the head of the department. They might be under somebody who's more experienced. And some of those people did it for a film or two and then maybe went to law school, but some of them stuck. And we've got some really, really good professionals here in New York who started with Spike because he said, "I'm just going to do this."
Right.
And I think, the last couple movies I've made, I've had a woman as a cinematographer. There's a lot of good women cinematographers out there. Okay, so you're making a film. Look around. When
Yeah.
I made Brother from Another Planet, I said, I'm going to have an African-American cinematographer. And there was Ernest Dickerson.
Yeah.
And I got lucky. He's one of the best cinematographers I ever worked with.
Right.
You know,
right.
but the point was I was going to have people on Brother for Another. The heads of departments were going to be African-Americans.
Right. Well, that's really all you have to do, and is you have to just make a commitment and a decision. You know what? I'm going to do it this way, and then that's the way it becomes. I remember Spike challenging Eddie Murphy at one time. You're a huge star.
Mm-hmm.
Why don't you have more black crew on your films? And Eddie said, I don't run a studio. I don't have a say in this. And Spike said to him, "You're Eddie Murphy.
Yeah.
You could demand anything you want. I want a black cinematographer. I want the costume designer.
Yeah.
These are black characters. I want a woman or a man who's a costume designer that's going to be African American." And when people start to think like that, when they start to change, and you're right, the Spike probably did more to integrate crews in New York City than anybody, just simply by giving people work.
Yeah.
And having them being able to learn how to do this. And now years later, they're the top of the line crew.
I wrote a movie that never got made for Denzel Washington was going to direct it. And it was about an African-American tank battalion who fought in World War II. And these guys basically only existed because Eleanor Roosevelt twisted Franklin's arm, and because the NAACP got to her and said, "How come we don't have any black combat soldiers?" Because they'd been pulled out of combat pretty much right after the Philippine-American War, Spanish-American War. And he said, "Okay, yeah, sure." And they made, and so these guys were stationed in the South where they had all kinds of problems. They were all high school graduates, and they got very good at tanks. And they had the shitty tanks that nobody wanted to bring overseas to fight the Nazis, but they figured, well, nobody's going to want these guys. Nobody, no general's going to want these black guys, tankers. And so they became the tankers who did go over after their 6 months or sometimes 4 months of training, did their war games against. So these guys were doing that for 3 years. And so they were better than anybody. And finally, right after D-Day, Patton ran into the hedgerow country, and they were just getting creamed, and he needed tanks. And he said, well, and he was a very racist guy from New Orleans or whatever he was. He said, "I don't care who they are. Get them over here. I need tanks." And these guys rolled off the LSTs, and all of a sudden they were in these 88s, these new tanks. It was like a Cadillac, compared to what they'd been driving before. And all the soldiers on the beach said, "Who are you delivering that to?" And he said, "No, this is my tank." And at first, none of the white, because the ground troops would walk besides these things, the infantry, and nobody wanted to be anything to do with them until they got into combat and they realized, can we be with those guys? They're so good. They were in the Battle of Bulge, and they were in the front lines for 180 days, and liberated some of the camps and stuff like that. And I think that's what you find when you bring people in who've been left out. There's a lot of talent there. Same thing in politics. What you're seeing now is a lot more women are mayors of cities because it's such a shitty job.
Right.
People have said, "Oh, what the fuck?" Let them take it, and they're good at it. Because that talent was already there. It's just like, well, we can't run a woman. We'll get killed.
Right.
Until you do, and she wins, and then she turns out to be good at the job. Right. And not everybody's going to be good at the job, and of course not. But if you're down at 10%, that means there's a lot of percentage people who aren't even getting a chance, who are going to be really good when they get the chance.
Well, thank you for helping to fix this problem in your own way. It's appreciated, I think, by many, but mostly I think we're appreciative of the great films that you've given us over the years. I want you to keep making films. I know.
I'd like to.
Don't stop. You look healthy and alive and alert. And you've just written
Compass Mentis.
Yeah. So, John Sayles, thank you. I know I've kept you longer than I promised, but I really appreciate this. And I look forward to reading this book, Yellow Earth, and to seeing your next film. Thank you for being on Rumble.
Thank you.
And thank you, all of you who have been listening to this. And don't forget to subscribe, write a review. It's all free. You subscribe for free wherever you're listening to this. Tell your friends about it. Share it with others. A lot of people don't know how to, they're not listening to podcasts yet. And so give them a chance. Maybe show them how to download and listen to a podcast. It's pretty easy. We're so grateful and very happy to be talking about these things, especially during the time in which we're living. So hang in there, everybody, and we'll talk to you soon. This is Michael Moore.